therapy that is a part of the foster system in another way. And the reason I bring that up is I have experience personally in my family assisting for 18 months or about a year and a half with a child who was on the autism spectrum and required ABA therapy. And I saw just the incredible changes in his life that it created. And then furthermore, in my work with a nonprofit association, I've dealt with hundreds of families who have children on the autism spectrum, some who have even been not undiagnosed from being on the spectrum due to this therapy. And the reason I bring it up even further for the foster system is we're looking at currently somewhere in the realm of 1 in every 36 8-year-old children were estimated to be on the autism spectrum. That was as of 2020. It's more so prevalent in boys than girls. And it's reported to occur across all racial and ethnic groups. So families and children that are struggling on the autism spectrum, they often need in-home support, and that can come in the form of ABA therapy. Children that are on the spectrum have a heightened sensitivity to tactile, auditory, olfactory, and thermal. Because of this, it can also often kind of recoil from interactions. And if we're looking at children that are in the foster system and trying to improve both if they're going to their family or going to a foster situation, all of the children in the system need their support, but especially these children that would fall on the autism spectrum. And many of the children that fall within this realm go undiagnosed. So I want to make sure that within the system, we have a particular focus on highlighting it. Let me just check a couple notes here. Just to give a little bit of background on ABA therapy itself and the origins, go back to a gentleman, a psychologist named B.F. Skinner, and he believed that behavior is changeable through positive reinforcement. He found through research that we all learn through the consequences of our behavior, and behavior that is reinforced tends to rewire and become our default behavior. He also found that behavior that is not reinforced tends to dissipate over time. While we see this, it's common in all of our lives. ABA simply expands that level, and it does it in intensive ways. So if, for example, a child is struggling with learning colors and they're stuck, you keep saying, point to the red object, and they can't point to the red object, they keep focusing on yellow. Once you do get them to focus on that red object, then you reinforce that with something, maybe a food that they like, or an opportunity to play in an area that they like, and you consistently do that over time. I know this seems to some kind of like common sense because it is something that works for all of us, but for children that are on the autism spectrum, considering ABA therapy, I think is really integral to what we should be doing in our foster system. And I'm just interested to hear from CFSA where we are with that, and if it's not something we're working on, if it can be incorporated into what we're talking about today.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. Don't go anywhere. We're going to turn to our other public witnesses. Dr. Bowman.
Yes, hello. Let me get my camera on here. Great. Hello. So I've submitted my testimony in writing, but I will share it now. I am the executive director of the Restoring Ivy Collective. I'm also a professor of social work at Gallaudet University, and former DC child welfare social worker and supervisor for about a decade. So I can attest to really the importance of alternative modalities of therapy for children and youth who've experienced maltreatment. At Restoring Ivy Collective, we primarily use expressive arts, yoga, equine, and other approaches for building social emotional regulation. So not clinical therapy, but what we are doing is survivor-led sort of somatic awareness and destigmatization of the experience of sexual trauma. So expressive therapies, which is a course that I teach at the university as well, it has a large range that includes creative arts to dance and other movement-based approaches. But it's been shown to be really effective in really all ages, but especially with younger kids with trauma and folks with any kind of verbal limitations and so forth. So, the concept of that was just discussed about folks on the autism spectrum, but really accessing trauma that's in the body and accessing trauma that is inherently present in kids that have experienced maltreatment, right, which is related to the child welfare experience, is so important. So trauma-informed expressive therapy includes elements of movement or artistic expression that allows the building of emotional capacity and also processing the maltreatment trauma. So the internal process of that expressive arts is so important because trauma has both physical and mental manifestations. And so, when we talk about trauma being held in the body, if you want to look at Bessel van der Kolk's work around sort of the Body Keeps the Score book, but sort of where in our body we hold trauma and how physical movement and addressing those physical expressions of trauma can actually be effective symptom management and longer term therapeutic benefit. I know as a survivor of sex trafficking myself, yoga was really effective for me in healing from my trauma. It took a while before I was ready to sit on a mat, but that is something that we have found to be effective. When kids are wanting to engage in it, we do provide that for Hope Court Youth in DC through Restoring Ivy Collective. And sort of the applying elements of person-centered theory to arts or other creative somatic expressions. The participant is able to communicate their needs and feelings and all of that without requiring verbal expression. And so then the clinician can then engage in assessment, guided therapeutic exercises to help the participant to gain self-efficacy, coping skills, insight, and address the somatic symptoms of trauma, which can be pretty uncomfortable and dysregulating and difficult, particularly for youth. I will say that the risk factors related to untreated trauma and commercial sexual exploitation of children have an intersection, right? And so we, in working with kids that have a history of maltreatment, there is trafficking prevention work that's happening, right? By allowing that connection to the body, because of maltreatment, we naturally become oftentimes disconnected from our bodies, and that sort of dissociative experience can affect our risk of being trafficked and being exploited, or even just future violence, right? Domestic violence, sexual abuse, sexual assault, that sort of thing. So because traffickers are targeting folks because of this perceived vulnerability, we as the system have the ability to reduce systems gaps that can enhance trafficking risk. And this is one of those ways that I think that is a really important thing to consider, is these alternative therapy approaches. We increase individual resilience by building social support, social skills, emotional regulation, and therefore reduce risk to future exploitation and abuse. So I think expressive arts being added is not only helping youth to heal from trauma, but helps them reduce risk factors that can lead to future traumatic experiences.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. If you could hang on, we'll have some questions for you after we finish with all the public witnesses. Tammy?
Good morning, Chairperson Henderson. I'm Tammy Rossinga-Cote. I'm the Senior Supervising Policy Attorney at Children's Law Center and a resident of the district. Children's Law Center believes that every child should grow up with a strong foundation of family, health, and education and live in a world free from poverty, trauma, racism, and other forms of oppression. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Each year, CLC attorneys represent more than half of all children in foster care as guardians ad litem. As a result, we see firsthand the multitude of behavioral health needs our clients experience and the impact on them when access to appropriate treatment services is delayed or denied. We also see our clients' birth parents, foster parents, and kin caregivers similarly struggle to access behavioral health services, which ultimately impacts the well-being and stability of the child because it creates sometimes insurmountable obstacles to reunification, adoption, or an otherwise stable living and caregiving situation. These are not new problems. The harms our clients have experienced for years due to the district's broken public behavioral health system have compelled CLC to make behavioral health system reform a top priority for close to a decade. We've partnered with organizations across the city, as well as government agencies and the council, to identify and address the gaping holes in our public behavioral health system and continuum of care. The bill before the committees today seeks to improve foster youth's access to behavioral health services by requiring CFSA to provide children in care with alternative forms of expressive therapy. Although we support this effort, we must emphasize that the responsibility to ensure all children who receive their health benefits through Medicaid, including foster children, have access to the best and most therapeutically appropriate behavioral health services rests with the district's health agencies, DBH, DHCF, and DC Health. Although CFSA has built some capacity to provide behavioral health services to foster youth, CFSA cannot compensate for DC's broken public behavioral health system. Children who have been removed from their parents and placed into foster care due to substantiated allegations of abuse and neglect almost universally experience significant trauma that impacts their mental and behavioral health. This trauma, due to the conditions existing prior to their removal or to the removal itself, may or may not result in a diagnosable mental health condition. But the majority of children in care need behavioral health supports to address the pain and stress they've experienced. They also need support to help them and their caregivers work through relationship challenges, achieve stability and permanency, and exit CFSA's custody. After reviewing several hundred of our most recent cases, we found that more than a third of our clients had at least one diagnosed mental health condition, including ADHD, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, bipolar disorders, trauma and stressor-related disorders like PTSD, dissociative disorders, and/or disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders. Of these, many presented with ongoing emotional and behavioral dysregulation, some with suicidal thoughts, problem sexual behaviors, and histories of sexual abuse. Further, approximately 20% of our clients had additional behavioral health needs that were not captured by a specific mental health condition diagnosis, including anger issues, incontinence, recurring nightmares, substance abuse, grief, disordered eating, and/or they were witness to or a victim of violence. Although our clients are arguably amongst the children with the greatest and most urgent need for behavioral health services, our clients frequently struggle to access some of the most basic services our system should be able to provide. The proposed legislation recognizes the importance of ensuring children in foster care have access to a range of therapies. Although we support this effort, the proposed legislation should clarify how the agency shall make available the listed alternative therapies. If the intent of the proposed legislation is to require CFSA to provide access to alternative therapies outside of the public behavioral health system, then it should specify the mechanism by which CFSA is supposed to provide those services and ensure that all necessary funding is provided. Although CFSA redesigned its mental health services program in 2018 with the goal of ensuring timely and accessible services for children in care, it is simply not possible for CFSA alone to develop the in-house capacity needed to meet all the behavioral health needs of CFSA-involved children and families. To expect this would be akin to expecting CFSA to build a separate healthcare system to meet all the physical health needs of CFSA-involved children and families. There are also significant drawbacks to CFSA serving as a direct provider of behavioral health services to foster children and their families. First, there is a basic trust issue that arises from children and sometimes their birth parents receiving therapy from the agency that separated them in the first place. Second, although CFSA's therapists provide some services to families, their services primarily focus on children in care. We need continuity of care and services for all members of the family to serve the child's stability and well-being. Third, CFSA's in-house services are intended to be short-term, lasting only until the child is connected with a Medicaid provider in the community until the child's case closes. This is not ideal under either circumstance. Transitioning a foster child to a Medicaid provider disrupts the therapeutic relationship and requires the child to start over and share their trauma again with a new provider. Alternatively, if the child's case is closed, they lose access to CFSA's in-house services at the time of major transition when they are most likely to need that service. We note these limitations not to disparage CFSA or their clinicians, but to underscore that the nature and reach of the in-house structure is limited. We appreciate the efforts the agency has made to address the critical shortage of behavioral health services for our clients, but the agency should not have to create a secondary public behavioral health system in-house to meet the needs of the district's children. My colleague Amber will talk more about the changes we need to see to that public system. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know we have your full testimony for the record. Amber?
Good morning. My name is Amber Reiki, and I'm a project lead at the policy team at Children's Law Center. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the scale and scope of unmet behavioral health needs of the children's foster children and their families. My colleagues are sharing the impact on our clients when access to appropriate service is delayed or denied. My testimony will identify the concrete steps the district should take to improve this. In 2021, Children's Law Center co-authored a report called A Path Forward: Transforming the Public Behavioral Health System for Children, Youth, and Their Families in the District of Columbia. Through collaboration and research, our report details the obstacles and incomplete infrastructure in our current system. The major issues related to today's discussion are workforce shortages, unsustainable financing for public behavioral health services, scarcity of necessary services, especially facilities for intermediate and acute levels of need, deficiency of publicly available data on behavioral health conditions or program effectiveness, and siloing where coordination should occur. Our report offers 94 recommendations to achieve an effective and complete continuum of care for every age. I will share just 5 recommendations today. First, we call on the district to produce a strategic plan for children's behavioral health. DC's former Department of Mental Health had the Children's Plan, which was last updated over a decade ago. Production on a new, coordinated, detailed, and measurable vision could be initiated in the FY 2025 Budget Support Act. Second, we must maintain and expand investments in prevention and early intervention programs, such as Healthy Steps and school-based behavioral health, to increase support available from skilled caring adults. Third, we must build services and facilities for intermediate and acute levels of care, specifically for youth, such as substance use treatment, partial hospitalization programs, a bridge clinic, and psychiatric residential treatment. Fourth, the council and other stakeholders need access to important data from agencies, such as the cost study of the school-based behavioral health program that was due last year. Other government documents like the Mayor's Healthcare Workforce Task Force and the DC Auditor's Report should be implemented. Finally, the district must invest in its workforce and explore more inclusive staffing models to improve access. We must increase reimbursement rates and grants to better support an adequate and diverse network of child-serving providers and CBOs. Medicaid managed care organizations must offer payments that encourage providers to participate. It is critical for DHCF to monitor and enforce network adequacy standards within MCOs. More details on these recommendations are in our written testimony. If we hope to deliver comprehensive and sustainable behavioral health care to children and families, including those in CFSA's care, we need a coordinated vision, increased investment, and deliberate action. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Amber. Mr. Cox?
Good morning. Sorry, just one moment. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is William Cox, and I am a staff attorney with Children's Law Center. And I have represented children as a guardian ad litem for over 3 years now. Today, I'm here to share a story that unfortunately has become all too common for foster youth of DC. This story is about a child who I will refer to as Alex to maintain confidentiality. Alex is a middle school student whose life was turned upside down when they were removed from their mother and placed in foster care more than a year ago. While removal of a child from their home is always unfortunate and traumatic, the government and I were initially optimistic that Alex could be reunified with their mother relatively quickly. It was clear to all involved that the most important intervention needed to heal this family was therapy, especially family therapy. To their credit, within the first 30 days of Alex's removal, the agency made referrals for individual therapy, family therapy, and community-based intervention, also known as CBI. However, Alex was initially connected to a core service agency that didn't offer family therapy or CBI services. It also took over 5 months to connect Alex to an individual therapist. Less than a month later, after finally having a therapist, Alex was then abruptly switched to a new agency, requiring a new intake appointment, another wait list, and the new agency once again didn't offer any family therapy or CBI services. There were also significant barriers getting Alex's mother connected to mental health services. While getting the child services should always be a priority, it is often just as important, if not more so, to get the parent connected to services that provide the coping skills needed to keep the family together. Unfortunately, in a pattern I have seen time and again, even when there aren't long wait lists, many providers are only available during business hours. While 1 to 2 hours of therapy per week may not seem like much, there are few minimum wage hourly employers willing to tolerate that much time off every week, and Alex's mother could not afford to risk the only income she had to feed her family. Today, Alex's case is still open. They still haven't been provided with either family therapy or CBI services. Alex has had to go through crisis after crisis without any mental health services and has bounced between more than 5 foster homes in just a few months. What's even more tragic is that this failure to get Alex the services they and their mother desperately needed has now caused irreparable harm and threatened the possibility of reunification. There is almost no doubt that if this family had been connected to family therapy from the very beginning, Alex could have safely returned home within the first 6 months. Instead, it is now more likely that this family will be permanently ripped apart. Not knowing how to help a family in crisis is frustrating. But what's absolutely infuriating is knowing exactly what's needed, yet not being able to provide it. The mental health resources available to DC foster youth and their families are grossly inadequate. We can and we must do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Ms. Conway?
Thank you. Good morning, council members. My name is Megan Conway, and I'm Senior Attorney and Policy Liaison at Children's Law Center. In over a decade as a guardian ad litem, I've seen consistent barriers when clients need to access and connect to behavioral health services in the public system. My testimony will note challenges related to intake, wait times, and accessibility of qualified providers. I hope I can illuminate the pain points where improvements can be made so that children and caregivers involved with CFSA can better connect to essential services. A child or caregiver is referred for behavioral health services through a variety of pathways. For children, an evaluation by CFSA often indicates therapy is needed. For caregivers, CFSA may recommend or the court may order participation in therapy as a requirement to reunify with their children. Tracking down the service can be an ordeal, whether within CFSA's Office of Wellbeing, a DBH core service agency, in the Medicaid provider network, or through private providers. Imagine a teen trying to wade through this bureaucracy during a major life upheaval to get a service they may or may not want. Once a provider is eventually identified, the next hoop is the intake process. The wait for the intake appointment may be weeks or months out. It then requires a diagnostic assessment with one person, an initial psychiatric meeting with another, the wait for recommendations, and then another wait to get linked to someone new for therapy. There's no centralized intake or wait list, it seems, which would greatly simplify the process. When a family's in crisis, every single day waiting for service matters, but my clients consistently have extremely protracted waits. One parent was court-ordered to participate in therapy to reunify with their children. They waited 6 weeks to be linked and set up with the CFSA and complete the intake process, then waited at least 4 months to be assigned to a therapist. At that point, they tried to switch CSAs to expedite the process of getting linked to therapy, as they were very motivated to get their children back. They completed the necessary process to connect again with a new agency, but they were on a wait list for another 4 to 5 months. Finally, they were assigned a therapist, and then they started to build a rapport. Then that therapist left the CSA and they were returned back to the wait list. After nearly a year, they were back at the beginning. It's important to keep in mind that, per federal law, if a parent does not reunify with their child within 15 months, the government must move to terminate the parental rights and work towards adoption. While I have seen some excellent therapeutic providers help clients make process, I have seen many more examples over 10 years when the needed services did not exist, when clinician turnover let my clients down, or when in-person therapy was impossible to find. Recently, the new requirement that community-based intervention workers have a master's degree virtually eliminated CBI as an available service. Before 2022, I had CBI workers on over half my cases. Today, I have none. In conclusion, children and families should have access to timely, high-quality mental health and substance use services, but that is not the norm for my clients. Something must be done to address the complexity and the workforce shortages that lead to long waits and disappointing experiences. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I don't see Rachel.
So yes, I wanted to speak on behalf of my colleague, Rachel Unger, if I may. She's in a previously scheduled court-ordered mediation on one of her cases right now and won't be available until it's finished. I'm happy to read her testimony if helpful.
Did she submit a copy of her testimony for the record?
She did.
Okay, so we'll go with that as well, because I'm sure her testimony probably aligns with what both you, Ms. Conway, and Mr. Cox, and Ms. Reiki, and Ms. Wisher-Cote brought up. So I'll ask some questions on that. But before I do that, before I get to all of the public witness questions, in line with the Committee on that is the end of the witness list that I have. But in line with the Committee on Facilities and Family Services tradition, we're opening up. So anyone who is not listed as a witness, but who wishes to provide testimony can do so now. Okay. You just state your name for the record. There you go.
Is the mic on?
Yes.
All right, great. Hi, my name is Javon Oliver. And I'll be testifying on behalf of the Olive Tree One Care. And I did submit my testimony. I submitted it late, so it should be available online for review. Honorable Council Member Henderson, my name is Javon Oliver, the Executive Director of Olive Tree One Care, LLC. We are a group of licensed allied health clinicians. We're licensed professional counselors, therapists, social workers, marriage and family therapists who operate under the DC 1115 Behavioral Health Transformation Waiver. And you could find the authority under DHCF Transmittal 1925. Olive Tree One Care is a registered LLC in Washington, DC. I have a CAQH number, a national provider identifier, and that solidifies Olive Tree One Care as a group eligible in the district to practice behavioral health treatment within inside of the scope of our license. And in addition to that, we're also set up and we're able to bill all three managed care organizations for Medicaid inside of DC. In accordance with last year's fiscal year 2022 CFSA's performance oversight hearing on the Council on Health, There's a need to enhance the ability of resource providers to care for children and youth with disabilities, complex medical and behavioral or psychiatric concerns to minimize placement disruptions. And this came right out of last year's CFSA performance oversight hearing. And it's found on page 4. The problem is that there's no budget for that. Also, in the same report, there's a need for more families to receive substance use and wraparound services. Again, you'll find identified in that report that there's no budget for that. Also in the same report, 16 out of 165 children need a child-specific recruitment plan for an adoptive parent. Of those 16 children, 9 have behavioral health needs and 3 are medically fragile. You could look on page 7 and you'll find that. In short, the Olive Tree One Care would like to partner with CFSA to assist this noble agency in meeting their performance goals. Olive Tree One Care can provide on-demand telehealth crisis, individual, and family therapy to foster parents and children to reduce placement disruptions and unnecessary PRTF admissions. By the way, if you look in that same annual report, you'll find out that the out-of-home placement for a child in the district is $4,700 per child. In addition to providing that telehealth, substance use and wraparound treatment services, our agency can further support CFSA by providing telehealth, psychotherapy, and care coordination to individuals in their home, in their natural setting, as well as address the needs of the family. We could provide those services on demand, reducing the need for or reducing issues to access the services. So again, I would like to present DC with the opportunity to be put on the map to be the most innovative behavioral health practice in the nation by providing this type of telehealth service to our district residents and families in need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. And thank you to all of our public witnesses. Because I'm gonna try to stay honest and truthful. So if y'all could put me on a 8-minute clock, just so I could make sure that I stick to what I'm supposed to do, that'd be great. So thank you. Commissioner Rapp, I'll start with you. So I appreciate your testimony on ABA therapy. My understanding is that ABA therapy is covered. And I hope that you're able to get some follow-up with CFSA to sort of maybe discuss more about the work that they're doing on that front. I wanted to ask a couple of follow-up questions to the team from Children's Law Center. So first, Amber, you mentioned in your testimony that there was a plan that had not been updated for over a decade.
Right.
Is it one of those situations where the plan is in draft and it just hasn't been approved?
Not in this particular case.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Not in this particular case. The children's plan, which I referred to, is still available on DBH's website. It was created by the predecessor to DBH, the Department of Mental Health, and was updated over a number of years, but was last touched in 2012.
Okay. All right, we'll ask some questions about that. Mr. Cox and Ms. Conway, you both talked about wait lists and the long times. And it is heartbreaking to know that when there is a time limit, or these are time sensitive activities when there are wait lists, what would you all say is the source of the disconnect? Is it not enough providers? Is it the bureaucracy not being able to appropriately process the paperwork in order to connect someone on time? Is it all of the above? Is it something else I haven't mentioned?
It's hard to know for sure on our end, but I would suggest that it's probably all of the above, but that the longest waits maybe come from staff shortages. certainly the bureaucracy
Staff
and paperwork.
shortages on which side? Agency staff shortages or provider staff shortages?
Provider.
Provider. Okay. Mr. Cox, I don't know if you want to weigh in there.
I agree with Ms. Conway. I had the same impression. It is all the above, but the most clear and immediate barrier seems to be the availability of providers, especially of family therapy or just providers qualified to work with children.
Okay. I think a few months ago, I had a hearing with DC Health with some of the boards, and I talked to the chair of the board of psychology. And we had a very open conversation where I just sort of asked, like, why don't more of your members either take Medicaid or take insurance in general? And he talked about the reimbursement rates being problematic, and that for many of them, they can earn way more from individuals who can afford to private pay. And so there's no compelling piece there. And I'll ask this question of DBH, but DBH and CFSA, but do you all have an idea of when the last time we've done a reimbursement increase for providers who do care specifically with children in the system?
I know that DBH and DHCF are working hard right now on the rate study for the upcoming Carvin. But we also know that the reimbursement rates that were in the last year's budget were based on 2016 costs. And so while there have been marginal improvements to certain services along the way, and we do hope that with the carve-in from DBH into the Medicaid managed care offerings, that there are reimbursement increases on the way, it's only for certain services, and even then will most likely be insufficient. I think it's also important to note that those private providers who don't really have any compelling reason to need to take Medicaid have full caseloads with folks who need these services but can pay out of pocket for them. It's not just kids in Medicaid who need behavioral health services, so the demand is really high on these providers.
Oh yes, I mean, when we talk about wait lists for anything, right? I was talking to no, I wasn't talking. I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they were talking about the wait list, even just to get a pediatrician appointment can now take, 60 to 90 days because of both demand, but also a shortage in terms of providers. And I know from our licensing perspective, at least in the family therapy space, we don't actually have a lot of people who are licensed to do that particular type of therapy work.
Correct. And in our testimonies, we note various other specializations that are missing, like multisystemic therapy, dialectic behavioral therapy, and others. But family therapy is really one of the most needed for our clients and almost impossible to get.
Okay. So what are legally, what are the options on the table for you all as guardian ad litems? When you have a client, I think Ms. Conway, you said you have a client who's been on the wait list for 3 to 5 months. Mr. Cox, you talked about a client who it took over 5 months to disconnect him or her with just a individual therapist, but still the client has not received the family therapy option after all of these months. So it feels as though the city, DC government is not legally meeting our obligations to provide services. So what options do you all have legally to compel us to act? Now, I'm not the lawyer. Come on, y'all.
Okay. So, we are really limited to our individual representation on those cases. So we do our best to escalate the concerns, to reach out, to go up the chain at DBH, to recruit our partners at CFSA, higher ups in the Office of Wellbeing, to try to be the squeaky wheel, if you will, for our client. But certainly that, that may help sometimes for one client. It's not necessarily great for the system.
Yeah.
So, and I think my colleagues will be better suited to answer questions about systemically what legal options we have. I'll also note Ms. Unger has joined now, and she just needs to be promoted to panelist if you're still
Okay.
considering.
Let me wrap on this, and then I'll definitely give Ms. Unger her time. Mr. Oliver, thank you for your testimony. You guys don't do family therapy, do you?
Yes, we do.
But telehealth only?
Yes, currently we're providing telehealth. We're a new operation. We just opened up this year. We're starting by opening up telehealth. We're working with a vendor, eClinical Works, for electronic medical record. They're already engaged with our FQHCs so that we could coordinate care.
Okay. You're
So we
licensed
have
and certified by DBH? I'm just trying to pair here.
licensed and certified in the district. And in addition, I'm bringing more clinicians from out of state, getting them licensed to provide services in the district via the mechanism of telehealth. This is one of the way our agency, Olive Tree One Care, is working to resolve the staff shortage that all of the providers are aware that the behavioral health system in the district is suffering from.
Okay, thank you. So the Children's Law Center team, Dr. Bowman talked about expressive therapy and those types of things. I know that you all are saying our big need for our clients is around family therapy, but do you all have any comments about the Bill 25-500, which is also part of this, in terms of giving other alternative restorative options, not just talk therapy, as an option for your clients?
Yes, we're very supportive, and definitely many of our clients would benefit from those services. I think our main comment, which is fleshed out more in our written testimony, is about addressing the mechanism of delivery, because again, like where there are very few providers, almost none who take Medicaid, the only way for this to really happen would be if the agency had explicit funding to pay for private services. Or, I mean, I don't know, if there's other solutions, we'd be excited for that too. We would love for our clients to have more access to these kinds of services.
Okay. Ms. Bowman, for the folks in your other professional colleagues, is insurance a thing that you all accept?
You're talking to me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So we are not using any kind of insurance. We are grant funded. So the work that we're doing is through contracts and through grants. So it's a separate system. But we could be paneled with insurance if we felt like that was something that would benefit our clients. As of now, we've been able to do what we do without it.
Got it. Okay. I think that's probably something we'll have to consider from a fiscal impact perspective of, I don't like to provide people access with a service that they can't actually use if there's no insurance coverage, or they can't afford it or make it accessible in other ways.
Sorry,
okay.
We're a free service. Is I guess what I'm.
No. I'm sorry. I think for your organization you are, but I'm talking about the suite of your other colleagues who do also provide expressive therapies and things like that. I think we have to think through, if we are saying that this is an option that is available to the young people, but we don't have a suite or pool of providers who are taking insurance, then we need to make sure that there's funding available to still provide that type of care, not at a financial cost to the young person or to their family. That was all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm over my time, and I see Rachel who's waiting. So I'm going to say thank you to this panel. I think some of the things that you brought up are not only relevant for today's conversation, but tomorrow's conversation that I'm having with DC Health around health occupation revisions and sort of expanding perhaps scopes of practices for some of our already licensed areas and some of that stuff. I'm not even sure. I think we got like 90 people on the witness list. So some of you might be testifying for that tomorrow. And if so, I'll see you then. But thank you so much for being here.
Council member.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I didn't see like a button to just provide a little bit. I don't know if, since you're out of time, I can't provide some feedback.
Sure. Rachel was she just promoted? Great. So go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm just going to try to go as quick as possible. There was so much in the testimony. But just to note, my wife was the official guardian ad litem for our family member who we had from 18 months to 3 years. And we saw with all the services that were put in place, we were at, as Ms. Conway mentioned, we were at Children's 3 times a week, getting him all different types of therapy. And to get him in there, the process that was mentioned, of having the assessments, we ended up having to pay, with the help of a lot of family members, out of pocket to get a private assessment and a diagnosis. And it almost broke us, really. But you know, the importance of, especially the younger the child is, and the timing. Every week or month that goes by as they're developing is another week lost and another hurdle for them to overcome.
Thank you. Thank you for providing testimony on your experience there. Okay. So for the public witnesses who've already spoken, you can stick around or you can head out. Rachel, if you want to go ahead and provide your testimony.
Yes, thank you. My name is Rachel Unger, and I'm a staff attorney with Children's Law Center. As a guardian ad litem representing youth in child abuse and neglect cases, extreme stress and trauma are inherent to my clients' circumstances. A necessary aspect of our role is to advocate for clients to receive the services they need to mitigate the effects of their stress and trauma. But no legal advocate or court order can ensure clients receive supports that don't exist. And that is our current reality. DC's public behavioral health system lacks the resources to properly serve our clients, and it is leading to devastating outcomes. Today, I will share how the lack of adequate resources has impacted one of our clients. We will call this client Leslie. Following their removal, Leslie wanted nothing more than to return home. Their confusion and anger at why CFSA wouldn't allow them to go back to their mother and siblings affected their relationships and behaviors in all contexts of their life. Without a healthy outlet, Leslie's emotions built up and began manifesting in a self-defeating and tumultuous cycle. Leslie would spend day after day in foster care, waiting for the reprieve of their next parent-child visit. But when the time actually came to return home and visit with their mother, Leslie didn't know how to interact with her or express their emotions around having to be involved in this system. This led to increasingly adversarial dynamics between Leslie and their mother, and reinforced Leslie's feelings of rejection, abandonment, and unworthiness. Soon, those emotions began impacting Leslie's school days. Leslie began to lose academic interest and exhibited avoidance behaviors, such as getting into fights or missing school, which led to countless suspensions, police calls, and even trips to the ER for psychiatric assessment. These actions alarmed Leslie's foster parents who, feeling unequipped to manage these behaviors, would ask CFSA to remove Leslie from their home, which only served to renew Leslie's feelings of rejection, abandonment, and worthlessness, and the cycle would start all over again. This is a cycle that could and should have been interrupted. But each step of the process to engage Leslie in mental health services would take weeks or months to get through, from merely getting off the waitlist to schedule intake appointments, to waiting for core service agencies to identify and assign an available provider, to waiting yet another several weeks or even months before the provider was able to actually conduct their first session with a client such as Leslie. And even if you make it past all of these hurdles, it still doesn't guarantee that a client's mental health needs will be met. In my written testimony, I detail Leslie's ongoing struggle to access any meaningful community-based intervention services and the tragic consequences Leslie is experiencing as a result. Leslie's story is devastating, but unfortunately, it is not unique. Many of my clients face similar barriers to accessing mental health services, and so do their families. As I also detail in my written testimony, many of our clients' parents are unable to obtain timely, appropriate, or accessible mental health services. Delays in services translate into delays to achieving reunification, as a family's ability to reunify is tied to a parent's ability to manage both their and their children's needs. In sum, the consequences of DC's inadequate public mental health system are devastating to both youth and their families. I implore you to interrupt these cycles by increasing the capacity of DC's public behavioral health system. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And again, between you, Megan, and William, first, thank you guys for your work that you do on behalf of young people in the district and their families each and every day. And I'm going to ask some questions to just try to get some clarity. I am more familiar with the Department of Behavioral Health, because obviously I chair the Committee on Health. And so I know some of the limitations that we've had there, or some of the challenges rather we've had there with providers, even in the school-based mental health side of things. And so I want to try to get some more clarity from CFSA around what they're doing or how they're trying to coordinate or partner to be able to meet the services needs. Again, so we can get towards reunification, and if not reunification, even just healing amongst families on their types of things. So thank you again to all the public witnesses who testified. If you didn't upload your witness statement, if you can do so for the record, you can do that on the hearing management system online. But now I'm going to call our public witnesses, our government witnesses. Here we go. So here with us today is Megan Sullivan, who's the Deputy Director of the Department of Behavioral Health. And Nicole Gilbert, who is the Deputy Director of CFSA's Office of Wellbeing. Thank you both for being here. Moment. Okay. So before you begin, I need to swear you all in. So if you could raise your right hands, or you and anyone from your agencies who might also speak. There we go. All right, wonderful. I do it at one time, so we just capture everybody. Do you swear under or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to provide to the Council of the District of Columbia and this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Great. I don't know who wants to go first, so I'll leave that to you all. Okay, you just turn your mic on.
Good morning, Chairperson Henderson, council members and staff. My name is Nicole Gilbert, Deputy Director for the Office of Wellbeing at the DC Child and Family Services Agency. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on the Alternative Restorative Art Bill, Options for Youth Amendment Act of 2023, and mental health in the child welfare system of care. Today's testimony will focus on the proposed bill that will require CFSA to provide alternative restorative forms of therapy to youth currently being served by the agency, and to share our existing work to address the mental health needs of youth in care. CFSA is in support of the proposed bill as it aligns with our mission, our focus on well-being, and our current practice of providing youth with interventions that work best for them, whether it's traditional talk therapy, expressive therapies, such as animal, art, dance, and music. CFSA appreciates the Council's efforts to provide alternative therapy options for youth in district's care. Mental health remains a primary focus for the agency, and we continue to invest substantial staffing resources in this service, as evident by our existing internal mental health team. In October 2018, the CFSA mental health team was established to decrease the length of time for youth to access therapy or other clinical supports. The team is comprised of a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, a mental health supervisor, and 4 certified therapists. When youth are separated from their families, they are brought to the CFSA Healthy Horizons Center for a medical screening, which includes a preliminary assessment of self-harm and homicidal ideation intent. This helps to determine if youth can safely be placed in a resource home. After the initial screening, youth who are not already connected to mental health services receive a mental health evaluation with the psychiatric nurse practitioner. Upon completion of the evaluation, the psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner will decide whether therapy is needed, and if so, will develop a recommended treatment plan in collaboration with members of our mental health team. While the above process is outlined for youth recently separated from their families, therapy services are also provided to all youth in care. Lastly, CFSA mental health services are provided in various forms, including our office, which has dedicated therapy rooms, telehealth, and in the community as appropriate. As previously indicated, CFSA supports the proposed art bill. While we provide a core set of therapeutic modalities to support youth, there are circumstances in which alternative restorative therapy, as well as alternative specialized therapies, are needed. Examples of alternative therapies CFSA used to support youth include animal assistant therapy, applied behavioral analysis, and dialectical behavioral therapy. And that was one of the therapies that Mr. Rapp had referenced earlier in his testimony. Moving on to system challenges. It is well known that behavioral health systems continue to be challenged by high demand and inadequate resources. There is a shortage of certified therapists, staff turnover remains high, consistency in treatment planning and establishing goals is often disrupted, and access to specialized treatment remains limited. In fiscal year 2023, CFSA had a vendor that specialized in serving Spanish-speaking youth, and it also provided alternative therapies such as child-centered play therapy and mindfulness activities. Unfortunately, due to a shortage of therapists, this vendor was unable to continue services for CFSA. Mental health issues related to children, adolescents, and families remain a key area of concern. Young children do not know how to manage their trauma-inducing events, which may lead to long-term suffering. In response, there is a need for early intervention support with a focus on health and wellness to occur naturally in school settings and community organizations, not just in response to a trauma event. This will help children develop skills for using coping mechanisms to deal with distressing incidents. Prior to the pandemic, in addition to anxiety and trauma often related to involvement with the child welfare system, mental health was also complicated by everyday stresses of poverty, lack of job opportunities, housing insecurity, managing daily life activities, and the pressures of school and work. This would often result in depression, anxiety, aggression, and self-medication for some. While there have always been limitations in therapeutic supports due to capacity issues, there were also opportunities for youth and families to be engaged on a more personable level that embraced in-person activities, which aided in establishing a rapport and relationship buildings with therapists, community workers, and peers. As the pandemic evolved, it created a new world of opportunities and challenges for youth and families. While the world shifted to include more flexibility to support work-life balance, family time, and the convenience of engaging electronically via Zoom, social media platforms, and text messages, this has also led to an increase of loneliness and anxiety for many. Once again, some youth, particularly those with unaddressed mental health issues, were placed in a position of feeling helpless as the world shifted around them, requiring them to adapt to a new normal. This is also what can happen when children and youth become involved in the child welfare system. Their world shifts, often with no warning, and they're expected to adjust the best they can. As a result of the above, we're seeing increased general anxiety in some youth. They're not feeling in control of their future. This makes it hard for them to prepare for transition into adulthood because they begin to experience feelings of fear as evidence in their presentation of depression and anxiety, aggression, and self-medication. Often their families are also dealing with cyclical unhealed trauma, which prevents parents and caregivers from having the space to help their children. Lastly, as the demand for mental health increases, therapists remain in short supply, and for those available, many therapists are new to the field with limited training and skills to work with our complex population. In conclusion, while CFSA provides most services outlined in the ART bill, the agency supports codifying the alternative supports into law as we continue to expand opportunities to youth. Exposure to alternative treatments will allow youth to receive guided clinical support using play, animal art, dance, and music as therapeutic tools for coping with their feelings and emotions. In addition, youth are having to access things that can be transferred into everyday life, such as art supplies to paint and draw, taking nature walks, dancing, and listening to music to help them regulate their emotions and behaviors when they're not in therapy. As for the challenges that remain persistent in mental health, CFSA will continue to partner with the Department of Behavioral Health to address needs of our children, adolescents, and families involved in child welfare. Our DBH co-located staff has been instrumental in helping to secure ongoing services for children and families by connecting them to community support workers, community-based intervention services, medication management, and long-term therapy services if needed. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you. So I got it incorrect. Deputy Director Sullivan is not testifying, but is here to answer questions. So thank you so much for your testimony, Deputy Director. Yes, Ms. Gilbert. Also, you talk very fast, so.
Okay.
Yeah, which is fine. But I'm from New York, so I could keep up. But I was just like, wow, she is flying through this testimony, and we don't even have the clock on. But that's okay. All right. So you all obviously heard the public witness testimony. We have conversations about the bill in particular, and then conversations about the system. But I just want to ground us in some numbers because that wasn't exactly provided in your testimony, Director Ms. Gilbert. So I just want to make sure we kind of have an idea of what's going on. So you talked about at the beginning of your testimony, the current practices of the agency with regard to youth who are separated from their families, who they're brought, and then they do a medical screening, which is a preliminary assessment around self-harm, et cetera. The nurse practitioner at the time makes a recommendation. So how many young people, well, let me ask this. Do you all, when you do your data cuts, is it in fiscal year or is it by calendar year?
It's fiscal year.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So for fiscal year 2023, because that's completed on altogether, how many young people received an evaluation?
Right. So in fiscal year 23, we had 29 children to receive evaluations.
29. Okay. And of the 29, how many were recommended for some type of therapy going forward?
That was the 27 of our youth received it within 30 days. And of those, 23 youth was recommended to move forward with therapy.
Okay, wait, back up. So you said 23 youth
were recommended to move forward with therapy. So 29 youth received the evaluation, and of the 29 youth, 23 were recommended to move forward with therapy.
Okay. Okay. What are your own internal practices in terms of how quickly after a child is determined to need therapy services, do you connect them with a provider?
So they're connected pretty much right away. The current time frame that we have in place is that we've had our youth were connected to therapy within 21 days of the mental health evaluation for fiscal year 23, and for
within 21 days of evaluation. Okay.
Within 21 days of the evaluation. That's correct.
Is that best practice?
It is, as it relates to the timeframes that we used to experience, which would before, I mean, it could go on 3-6 months before youth were before we had our internal mental health team.
Okay.
Prior to that, we could wait months for evaluations and for youth to be connected to therapy. So that's one of the reasons why we established the mental health team internally.
Got it. Okay. So the mental health team internally is just for the triage.
It's for the triage process, and also it's available to children in care. So meaning that the way that we operate our mental health team is that for every child that's separated, there's a preliminary screening, which I spoke about in my testimony.
Yep.
And then from there, there's an evaluation process that can take place. And the evaluation helps to determine whether or not a youth is in need of therapy. And if they're in need of therapy, the mental health, the psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner would refer a treatment plan to our therapist team, and then they would proceed there with coordinating with the social work team to get the youth in to begin therapy services.
Okay. How many staff do you all have on your therapy team?
We have 4 therapists, 1 mental health supervisor, and 1 psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner.
All right. Hold on. 4 therapists.
1 mental health supervisor and 1 psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner.
Is that enough?
It's sufficient for the internal services we provide. Yes.
Okay. So how many young people do you all refer out?
Last year, according to the data we received from CFSA, we referred 105 youth to behavioral services. That's in fiscal year 23. And in fiscal year 24, we referred 10.
Okay. Okay. And of the 105 that you referred out, do you all track how long it took for them to be connected?
DBH tracks that. We have a DBH co-located support staff that tracks that information. So once we do the referral, and the referral could come internally. I mean, it may not necessarily come from my unit. It can come from anywhere within the agency because we have social work teams.
Right.
They can refer directly to DBH. And they track the information from there.
Okay. So Ms. Sullivan, of the 105 youth who were referred out for behavioral health services, how long did it take before you were able to connect them with the provider?
I don't know specifically for those 105, but we do have a KPI that measures across the behavioral health system, and our goal is within 30 days. So our benchmark and kind of best practice, as Ms. Gilbert said, is we're trying to get them into a first service within those, it sounds like CFSA was 21 days, but for us 30 days. So our benchmark's 85. Last year was at 85.
Oh, I'm sorry. Last year, your KPI was 85?
The benchmark was to have 85% of our youth to be able to get connected with that service, that first service, within 30 days.
Okay. Did we reach that?
We did reach that.
Okay.
So, but you specifically asked about those 105. I would have to go back and look at that data and get the specific length of time for those 105.
Okay. So just to sort of drill down a little bit further, just so I have an understanding, the 105 youth, those were individuals who were referred to behavioral health services as an individual. Does that include the numbers of families that you were referred or recommended to have family therapy services?
It does not. This just reflects the unique youth
Okay.
that were referred to DBH.
All right. So let's talk about family services, because we heard a lot of testimony about this being one of the things that is necessary for reunification. So how many cases do we have around family therapy services?
So at CFSA, our therapists are not certified in family therapy.
Okay.
Right. And so one of the things that we tend to do, there are times where we're able to support the parents individually and help to support that process, but we refer out for family therapy, which would be our support, some of the referrals we make to DBH.
Okay. How many people do we have in the pool? How many providers for family therapy?
That are certified in family therapy.
Your mic is not on.
Oh. Sorry, what I was going to say is that, again, depending on the age, we work really closely with CFSA within our PEACE program, which is the Parent Infant Early Childhood Enhancement Program. And so they actually do specifically are certified in family work. So they do evidence-based programs that work on parent-child relationship. So one that focuses CPP that focuses on trauma, and one that focuses on parent-child interaction. So again, within our network, I'm not sure how many certified family therapists there are, but there are definitely not only evidence-based programs, but individuals who are working with the youth and the family.
Okay. So here, there are two data points that are crucial, I think, to this conversation that I don't know if you have, but we need to have. One, how many family therapists do we have in our pool? And two, what's the wait list? Because you guys are making it sound like, oh no, we have this network, but then I have these attorneys who are telling me I have clients who are waiting 5 months to get connected. And so if we're not constantly seeing what is our availability to our demand, how do we know how many more we need? Is that information that you all can provide the committee?
We can definitely provide you with, we have capacity in our programs at PEACE that are specific to families. Again, based on age. So PEACE sees 8 and under. So for those youth who need, and families who are older than 8 and need family therapy, we would have to try and get that information. So there's other evidence-based models that do family work. But again, I'm not aware of how many family therapists per se, right? Many children, many social workers, LMFTs, licensed counselors are trained in family work.
True. This is what I'm saying though.
Yeah.
If CFSA is saying our therapists are not certified for family therapy, great. And they say we refer these individuals and their families to DBH. I have to imagine that somebody at the department is looking at a list or a system to say, hey, I've got this family. Well, I know we don't have a dashboard because I've already talked about that with Dr. Bazaran, but calling somebody to say who has availability, who has, I know you're not Googling, so
Right.
you have a list.
That is, I mean, I think as Ms. Gilbert talked about our co-located staff. So we have a staff member who works both with DBH as well as CFSA. And so if there's a specific need and CFSA staff member reaches out to her, we're trying to connect them to a specific program entity that is able to provide that service.
Right.
So she's the kind of liaison to help that.
But
work.
then I think also the other data point too is around what's the backlog? How many have yet to be connected? So for instance, of the 105 youth that were referred to you all, how many of those young people still have not received any first touch services? Do y'all know that answer? Because that's FY23. So we're beyond that part.
So the information I received from DBH is that they don't have anyone on the waiting list at this time. There were just 2 families that were waiting for family function therapy.
And they need a bilingual.
That needed a bilingual therapist. That's correct.
Okay.
And speaking about, I know we're talking about family therapy right now, but I know Children's Law Center talked a lot about CBI. And so while in the past there's been wait lists, we currently have capacity. So again,
But that's
there's
for under
CBI
8, right?
Say again.
For under 8?
No.
Okay.
CBI goes up, much higher as well. And it's more intensive community support or community-based intervention. So again, it seems like maybe there's a disconnect, right? We have capacity. And again, those might have been cases in the past, but currently we have, other than these 2 CFSA youth who need bilingual services are currently on a waiting list for FFT.
Okay. Let's talk about the bilingual services, because I noted that in your testimony, Ms. Gilbert, you said that in fiscal year 23, you had a vendor, just one?
Well, we had one vendor that we primarily use, but we also have our internal therapists. We have one therapist that's also Spanish speaking. So we have some internal capacity,
Okay.
but we did need to expand that. Actually, that was in place. They were in place. They worked with us for quite a while.
Okay. I feel like only having though an option for Spanish is limiting.
Yeah.
We have a very large Amharic speaking population and other languages. What do you all do when those families present?
Right. Well, we have actually a couple of our therapists, they speak a couple other languages as well. I did not bring that. I don't know if you have it. Oh, she's only Spanish. Okay. So the other therapist that transitioned out, yeah, that was the therapist that transitioned out that we mentioned in our response question. So one of those therapists transitioned out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So we
what's
have to
our-
look for supports in order to be able to accommodate any other children or families that may need other accommodations outside of Spanish.
Right. And again, CFSA and DBH are not the only ones who are dealing with this issue. I've gotten on the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice because we don't have any Spanish speaking violence interrupters in this city. So like there are limitations, but this is a critical language access issue. So how are you all, it's FY24. So do we have a new RFP out or RFA? What are we doing to get an additional vendor who has bilingual services?
Right. So we are going to have to explore the services and actually sort of circle back around because it had been a minute. And the only reason that the relationship was terminated is because of the lack of therapists. So we want to check back in with the resource because we want to sort of see if they were able to get back staffed up in a way where we could also put out another solicitation. But also internally, we've been able to handle the capacity thus far. So all of our Spanish speaking clients that we have are being serviced by either our therapists or what we've referred out so far. So we have not had any backlog issues as of yet.
Okay. I have a note here that while 93% of eligible children received the mental health evaluation within 30 days of entry in FY23, we're only at 33% for FY24 to date. So what measures are we implementing to improve the timeliness so we don't get behind for this current fiscal year?
Actually, I need to correct that. So we resubmitted the response to that. It was 3 children that were eligible. All 3 received the evaluations.
Okay.
So we're at 100% for that.
All right.
So we're going to send that
Look at
back
that.
to you for the record. Absolutely.
Already
Yes.
moving
And
along.
all 3 of those children were recommended for therapy.
Okay. When you talk about the ways in which someone comes to you all or is presented in terms of like, hey, they might need behavioral health services, fill in the blank of what that might be. What are the various ways for referral? So obviously a social worker or a case manager can can do so. Could a foster parent or someone who is in a group home, would they contact you all and say, hey, we think, you know, Johnny could use an evaluation and perhaps some other additional things?
And usually, if there's a youth or someone that thinks they need services, we coordinate with the social work teams. So there's a, whole team of support around them. So the social workers are usually the lead liaison, and they may send a referral or they'll contact us. But also if someone from a group home or whatnot contact us directly, we would also get the referral information needed from them and sort of support them in the same way. Absolutely. But social work teams they play an instrumental part in that connection process.
Right. So it sounds as though you all provide a range of in-house services within CFSA, which I think is great that we have our own individuals who can manage. What's their average caseload?
We could go up to 18.
18.
We could go up to 18
per therapist.
Per therapist.
That seems like a lot.
Well, right now we're averaging around 12 or so, I believe, per therapist. We're at about 12 right now, but we could go up to 18 because there are different needs.
Okay.
For therapy. So there's some youth that may need more intensive supports in therapy. And then there's some youth that may need sort of touch points type of support, kind of a maintenance type of situation. And so it just varies. So we say up to 18.
Okay. So when your internal folks reach their limit, is that now when you refer to DBH for an outside provider?
So both are happening at the same time. It
Okay.
really depends on what the need is. And so if it's a service that we provide internally, then we can transition within our own within our own mental health team. And then if it's a service that we need a provider to provide, so we provided a list of services that we send to external providers, that's when we would team with DBH.
Okay. In those particular cases, how do we ensure smooth transition? So for instance, I think of sometimes at the doctor's office, they say, oh, I think your child needs to see a specialist. And they hand you a piece of paper with the person's phone number on it and say, go ahead and call and make that appointment. Yeah. And of course, sometimes that appointment never happens. So how do we ensure a smooth transition and handoff?
We actually conduct sort of a warm handoff type of situation. So it would be the therapist being involved with the social work team and then being involved with the new therapist or the onboarding therapist. And so there is a treatment team meeting, a support process that happens. And then we work to help the youth establish a rapport with the new therapist. So that they're not just walking in and they have this brand new therapist. So there is a conversation that takes place. And of course, that would depend on the age of the youth. So it has to be appropriate.
I would just also add too, I think that even after that warm handoff is done, I think our agencies, I can think of a few special cases that have been extremely complex, and both teams have stayed kind of intact to try to help provide support. So that exactly what you talked about, there isn't, we don't miss something, right? And so kind of that ongoing and kind of follow-up teamwork, I think it's been important, especially in some of our more complex cases.
Okay. I want to ask some questions specifically about the legislation. Is this something that you all are, obviously there are lots of different therapy methods that we provide. Ms. Gilbert, you outlined those in your testimony. So I just want to clarify, you guys are in support of this bill?
We are, yes.
Okay. Do you feel like there would be a fiscal impact to the agency to be able to expand these types of therapy services?
Well, we're already providing some of the services now. So there are a few services we're providing, but I would think that as we expand services and start to get more of a demand and a capacity, I'll team with Director Matthews and we'll work through some of the fiscal impact pieces of that and what that would look like for us.
Okay. Are you good as well? Is DBH okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in support of providing the best support to youth. And so I think sometimes that's non-traditional therapies, especially with some of these youth who have had very complex trauma histories. So I think that anything that, has evidence in it that can help support youth and their families, we're definitely advocates for.
Okay. What would you all say are the biggest challenges that your agencies have for providing timely and effective behavioral health services to youth and families? We talked about staffing.
Right.
So, I think that's probably the biggest. If you don't have a provider, that is a significant challenge. What other things are barriers to success here?
Sometimes just engagement. So engaging the youth can be challenging at times, and that may require some extra efforts and some teaming with the social work teams and the support that the youth have in place. You have to be able to speak a particular language to stay in time and be able to connect in a different way, because like I said in my testimony, the world has shifted in so many ways for these youth. And so some of the traditional ways that we used to be able to engage and to speak and talk didn't necessarily work anymore. So I believe engagement is one of the biggest obstacles to sort of getting the process started and maintaining it. Because if they disengage in the middle of the process, then sometimes you have to start it over. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add, I definitely agree with Ms. Gilbert. I also think that to piggyback on that, consistency, right? So I think lots of times youth as well as parents, as well as other important entities are interested in the beginning to connect and are eager and are bought in. This is a process. And so to be, as you mentioned, could be multiple days a week or consistently weekly. And so sometimes getting that momentum and being consistent in therapies that are sometimes longer has been challenging. I will say that I think COVID helped us in this area we can be more flexible. If telehealth is something the family wants or in their home, we're able to adjust. So I would say engagement, consistency,
Okay.
and definitely workforce.
How do the agencies guarantee that foster youth who reside in foster homes situated in Maryland or Virginia effectively receive the services that they need?
So I know that they have providers actually in Maryland as well. So Maryland Resource Family Centers. So they're primary providers that work in the district and in Maryland. And so I know that I'll let Megan speak to that. But that's one of the ways we've been able to expand. And then we also serve and support some of the children in Maryland. Some of those children go to school in DC. And so that's one way that we can connect. And I spoke about it in my testimony or even my backup, where sometimes we are able to be in the schools, we're able to support in different ways. So.
All right. One of the things that the Committee on Health has been focusing on a lot, that we've seen sort of an emerging trend that we don't want it to become a further trend, is around substance abuse amongst young people. Are there specific drug prevention programs implemented by either agency that is directed towards young people within the foster care system around substance abuse?
So not specifically to CFSA, but as you're, within school behavioral health, Too Good for Drugs is one of the prevention programs that we do use. We just recently purchased additional, what they call kits or curriculums. We're in the process of training all DBH clinicians as well as the CDO clinicians. And then they will have access to the materials. So it's not specifically to youth who are with CFSA, but across. So again, somebody else mentioned the importance of prevention and early intervention. And so really trying to provide those resources and supports to, a broad range of individuals in the district.
Okay. Ms. Gilbert, when, there are mental health referrals and then there are referrals for substance abuse, how do you all handle those?
The referrals for substance abuse as it relates to youth?
Yes.
So we have a coordinator on staff that helps to support. We have a substance use disorder unit, and the referrals come directly to her, and we work really hard to connect them. So we have 2 or 3 providers in the community that we refer directly to. So we don't provide the services directly to just youth, but we do have 2 or 3 primary providers in the community, in addition to some of the work with DBH that we refer our youth to.
Are any of your providers residential?
No.
No. Okay. kind of knew that from DBH already, but I didn't know if you all had a stash that perhaps we can,
Not yet.
tap into. Because I honestly, when I look in terms of gaps of care, this is
Yeah,
a big one.
absolutely.
The fact that we don't have any residential treatment beds for young people struggling with substance abuse disorder, that we always have to say, oh, we'll refer you to Maryland. Oh, we got to refer you to Virginia to do that. And given what we know the opioid situation looks like in the district, this is like one of those things that we have got to figure out.
Absolutely.
And quickly.
Absolutely.
And quickly. Okay. I'm curious, for the in-house therapists that you all have, do you do Medicaid billing for the young people for who they treat?
We do, our mental health unit is connected to our clinic. So our
Okay.
Healthy Horizons Assessment Clinic. So we are able to do reimbursable, Medicaid reimbursable services.
Okay. And for Ms. Sullivan, are there any instances where the district is referring a family or young person to a provider who doesn't take Medicaid, and what happens in those situations?
Well, school-based is what you mean, an outside provider?
Yeah, no, I'm
School-based,
talking about an outside provider, because so for some of the specialty type of things that we talked about, whether it be ABA or DBT, the children still need it, regardless of whether or not the provider accepts the insurance. And so I'm curious what happens if we run into this situation of, we really need the service from this provider, they do not take insurance, what do we do?
Right. So I don't have any examples of that, but when you were talking, as well as some of the other individuals, it kind of made me think of the high fidelity wraparound program that it utilizes flex funds, which are local dollars, which aren't necessarily tied to a specific resource, right?
Okay.
There's flexibility in what you can use that for. And so again, if there is a specific need for that youth that isn't necessarily covered, once approved within, it just has to be a description. They can then use those local dollars to fund something that may not have been able to pay for. Does that make sense? So I don't know within kind of the mental health, for DBT, for example, like a specific like that, but it's an interesting thought, right? Like if there's providers out there who are implementing services or different types of therapies that have been helpful, right? How can we access those, right? And they have capacity.
Right. I mean, and it the similar question that I have when I would talk to the chairs of these boards is like, when's the last time that your board has had a conversation with the Department of Healthcare Finance? Because if it is an issue around reimbursement, but we don't know that because you never said anything, how can we move forward to say, okay, if we adjust the rates to move it up, I don't know, 10%, then I have a pool of 10 to 12 providers who would say, yeah, I'll come on in for that rate. But I don't know if we're having those conversations. Obviously, I don't want to incentivize providers to say, just hold out, because then the district will get desperate enough that they'll just pay you whatever. But I also don't want a young person to have to wait several months while we shop around for someone who may or may not accept the insurance. And if we don't find anyone who accepts the insurance, that we just say, sorry, that's not acceptable in my mind.
Well, and I wonder, is similar to workforce, right? Are there some short-term solutions while we're working on some more systemic, right? So as somebody mentioned, I think in their testimony, DBH and DC Healthcare Finance are currently in the rate study.
Do you have an update on that?
The update, well, the transformation is coming 4/1, so all the rates will be available then.
Wait, it's coming when? I'm sorry.
So the transformation, so our carbon is
Yes.
going live April 1st. Some of those rates are moving in as of now.
Okay.
And as it was mentioned, I think the rates were last looked at in 16.
I know. And this rate study
So
is
this
late.
rate study, and I will say again, I'm sure that there's other feelings about this, but we did build in inflation. So while they may not be at the rates that everybody is hoping,
Oh, this
we
is
are
not great.
doing-
Now you're going to start I'm going to start getting phone calls of people talking about like what the rates are going to be.
No, but again, it's coming to a conclusion, and we, again, as we mentioned, the carbon is going to be in effect fully for 1. So
Okay. So let me ask you this, and you can tell me if this is above your ability to answer, but are the new rates going to be built into whatever the fiscal year 25 budget is that the mayor is going to propose?
that is above and outside of my scope.
Okay. Okay. We'll follow up with the agency on that. If you guys need to just give me a minute.
Sure.
My screen here has restarted, so I can't actually see if someone else has joined. So just give me a moment. Okay, so we've been going for a little bit here. So I'm gonna take a 5-minute break. And hopefully by then, my co-chair will be here. So 5 minutes, okay, we'll be back. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and we're back. We have been joined by my colleague, Councilmember Lewis George, who chairs the Committee on Facilities and Family Services. Councilmember Lewis George.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson Henderson, for presiding over the hearing so far, and to your amazing staff. I appreciate you very much. I am excited. We are here today to discuss B25-500, the alternative restorative therapy options for Youth Amendment Act of 2023, and the mental and behavioral health of children in the district's child welfare system. The Child and Family Services Agency, better known as CFFS, is the District of the Columbia's child welfare agency. Of paramount importance to the welfare of the children is their health, both physical and mental. During this hearing, we are focusing on the latter, the mental and behavioral health challenge of resources available to youth in CFSA's custody and care. We all know that trauma results both from removing a child from their family and from the actions of abuse and neglect that are the reasons for the child's removal. Such significant and enduring trauma can have a myriad of effects on a child's welfare, especially their mental health. Youth in care often struggle with symptoms of post-traumatic distress disorder, anxiety, depression, harmful ideations, and many others. That is why it is vital that the youth in the district's care have every resource possible to help them process their past lived experience, cope with their present symptoms, and prepare for a happy, healthy, and safe future. I'm glad to have witnesses from both CFSA and DBH with us today so we can examine the entire behavioral health system for youth in care and discuss what is working well, what challenges still exist, so together we can improve resources, services, and outcomes for our kids in care. I think we're all aligned on that together. And so I'm grateful for that. I want to, I know Councilmember Henderson already has done some questions. So I want to come to both of our witnesses today and ask, so what are the protocols for action, outreach, or feedback when a particular child is having difficulty concerning connecting to services from DBH or Medicaid? And who is responsible for this outreach?
So when you say outreach, do you mean a youth is having trouble connecting to a DBH certified provider?
Yes.
Yes. So we have a variety of different ways. I mean, we have, unfortunately, it doesn't have to, hopefully it doesn't get to this point, but within the children's team, we have the ability, they can contact, the family can contact us, the provider can contact us. We also, if it's a CFSA child, we also have a coordinator that works with CFSA and DBH. So sometimes what happens is they go through their social worker, who the social worker is struggling to get connected, right? And provide the services that they're hoping for. And so again, several different things could happen, but usually goes through the social worker, who then works with our coordinator to hopefully resolve the issue. If it's an issue around getting connected, for example, with CBI, that coordinator can help see where there's capacity. If there's additional concern, she can bump it to our CBI manager at DBH. Again, hopefully that doesn't need to happen, but we have those levels in place. The other thing that sometimes happens is we have an ombudsman at both agencies. So sometimes we may hear if there's trouble connecting, or, you know, a variety of different problems. Sometimes we hear an issue from our ombudsman office, and so then that gets escalated to appropriate staff and we can help connect.
Got it.
So there's a few different ways.
There's a few different ways. So if what I understand from protocol is there's a social worker is the first line of offense, and then we have the social worker works with the coordinator, and the coordinator can escalate to CBI. That's the most traditional path, and then there's the possibility of an ombudsman coming in. Do I have that right? All right.
Yes, I would say as it relates to CFSA, if there is a concern, I mean, of course, we start with social work team, which is what you talked about.
Yeah.
We also encourage them if they are unable to get it resolved at that level that they escalate it to management. And then, of course, we want to resolve it internally as much as we can if possible. And then, of course, there is the support of the ombudsman office if needed. And then as a last resort, we're hoping it doesn't have to get here, but then of course, there's always communication with directly with the director if something can't be resolved, but.
Got it. Okay. Ms. Sullivan, as you know, CFSA in-home families access mental health services through DBH, not CFSA's in-house team. CFSA also refers out-of-home youth to DBH services not offered by CFSA's in-house team. When DBH receives a referral for an in-home family or out-of-home youth, does DBH have dedicated staff that process the referral, or are those individuals put in the general queue with everyone else?
So my understanding goes to the coordinator, but there are a few instances like you didn't hear before, but we have a clinic called Peace at Howard Road, which they do have specific links. Sometimes a CFSA youth gets directly referred to that program. So generally speaking, it goes through our coordinator to help support.
Okay.
That doesn't have to be the only way though.
Okay. And do the DBH staff co-located at CFS handle these referrals pretty much? And if DBH dedicated staff is not co-located and CFSA handles those referrals, how many FTEs is that? And do you think that is enough to process the caseload from CFSA's involved individuals?
So I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you speaking to capacity?
Yes.
Okay. So as far as the capacity, for the number of referrals that we have coming through directly into the CFSA internal mental health team, we have enough capacity to handle the load that we receive. And then as Megan indicated, for those services that need external support, we're able to refer those directly. So right now the capacity is sufficient.
Okay. And then what's the protocols or practices for coordination between like CFSA and DBH between each other, and then DC's other health agencies such as DC Health and DHCF? Like, how regularly do staff meet to discuss issues related to kids in care, and who at the agency is a liaison between convening people amongst those agencies?
So we have a DBH liaison, a co-located support staff actually on site in our office. She actually sits in the Office of Wellbeing. And so that is the primary person that serves as a liaison between CFSA and DBH. And then if they're, as far as referrals, she does the tracking, the connection. We're able to go to her to find out whether services have been put in place or what any delays are, anything like that. So she's our go-to sort of conduit for that level of information.
Okay. So that's one person who does that.
That's one person that helps to support us on behalf of DBH. And then of course, DBH has a team beyond the co-located staff. So there are times where we will pull the team together and we're able to talk through any other issues or any other supports that may be needed.
And do you all have like a regular sort of triage meeting where all of you are in the same room, you bring a case file in front of you, and if other agencies like DC Health and DHCF need to be involved, like you all sit in a room, triage your individual case?
That has happened. Yes. Okay. If a case needs to be reviewed or triage or anything that's happening with it, beyond some of the normalized steps that we take internally, then we can bring the teams together and have discussions about that.
But that's not like a regular practice. That's like as case by case as needed.
Oh, as needed, right. It's not, every single case is not reviewed to that level, but when we run into any type of concerns or issues, whether it's delays or, services not quite working out or whatever this issue is, then we can pull the team together to have a discussion about that. Absolutely.
And then as far as not just sort of taking out just individual cases, do you all just have sort of some monthly or quarterly meeting where you all get together and talk about cases from a broad perspective? And then you can triage smaller cases, but from a broad perspective, do you all have an interagency meeting?
We actually meet with DBH once a month. And
Okay.
so in that meeting,
fair.
anything that comes up related to cases, processes,
Okay.
anything like that, that they are able to discuss that.
Okay.
Once we have a regularly scheduled meeting with DBH.
Okay. As you both know, CFSA stores data from behavioral health assessments in its data management system known as FACES, while DBH uses several different electronic health record systems. How is data shared between agencies, both for individual cases and population level? What tech infrastructure is used?
For CFSA, we actually send DBH a monthly report of the youth, foster care youth in care and whatnot, so that they can use that in order to help to inform their data. And it also helps to inform some of those kids that are in care that may need services, some of those kids that receive services or whatnot. So there are times where CFSA, DBH, when they're pulling their numbers and they're trying to see exactly how many kids in care they're currently serving or anything like that, they're able to use our monthly reports to help inform that information.
Okay. I think one thing, what I was trying to get is it's sort of what challenges, if there are any, do you experience from using separate electronic health record systems from other agencies, right? So and this happens across the district and various agencies, but because you all use different electronic health record systems, I'm just wondering, if youth, are youth like sort of receipt of services ever delayed due to like inaccessible behavioral health records or other treatment information between agencies?
No, we're able to share information pretty quickly. I mean, it just takes more manual labor in order to make it happen, but we're able to share information, get information, and do the research that we do. We just happen to do it individually, and then we'll come back together and meet, just as we discussed before, and talk about the information we have.
And are there ways that you all see that from a perspective that we can improve that? So are there ways, Chris, the district's designated health information exchange can be better utilized to share the information of youth in care?
I mean, I think that, there's always ways to improve, right? And so lots of our, yes, we meet regularly, we talk regularly. Would it be easier if the systems were integrated? Probably, and less manualized work. And so that time that could be spent not doing it manually could then be used in other ways. So I think it could be improved for sure.
Okay. I mean, I just think it's something worth exploring in ways we can improve. I know from having worked in district government, the way in which the different systems really.
And there are different levels of confidentiality related to some of the cases and things that could complicate things for us. So
that's right. So what is CFSA's and DBH's position on whether it is preferable for children in care to receive their behavioral health systems directly from the agency versus from the public health behavioral health system and its network of Medicaid providers?
You're asking what is our preference, or is that our preference?
What is your position on whether it is preferable for children in care to receive their behavioral health services directly from the agency versus from the public behavioral health system and its network of Medicaid providers?
Well, I think the first thing I'll say is I think there's a need for a combination of it all. So I want to put that on the record. I think that there's a need for both, but it is easier for us once a youth is separated from their families, if we're able to evaluate them and then transition internally, because all of the information is right there. We have it immediately and we meet and share. So we have an internal mental health team that's able to take that information and sort of process it, develop a treatment plan and connect with the youth right away. The social work teams are there. So, the resource parents are there. So everybody's right there. So preferably, we would like to continue with the way that we're handling services to youth that we directly serve. But there are times, of course, as you know, that we have to refer out.
I think, the short answer, I think, is that we want to make sure that the youth and families, because the family work is just as important as the child and youth work, is as comprehensive as possible. And what we've heard today here is that there are some gaps, right? And so I think our goal in the end, as you mentioned in your testimony, is to make sure that youth and families are getting the services that they need. And so I think our perspective is helping and collaborating to try and get the services to the youth. And so obviously within the behavioral health system, if we can use our certified providers, you know, that's the way to go. And if there's other areas where maybe we can't meet those needs then we have a comprehensive system to try to wrap the family and the youth.
Okay, I'm trying to summarize what your preference is.
I mean, I think our preference is obviously we certified, you know, CSAs and certified providers. We know that there's shortcomings, right? And
Okay.
so we want to make sure that the youth are getting the best care that they can get.
Okay.
Ideally in our certified providers, but also want to make sure that the youth district residents are getting the behavioral health services that they need.
Gotcha. Let me ask you all this. Does, Ms. Sullivan, does DBH collect data or track trends regarding the extent to which children in foster care and their families struggle to access behavioral health services? And what is DBH's perception of the extent to which this is a problem?
So we spoke a little bit earlier, like we do track like access to services, and we have a KPI measure on timely services. And
Okay.
I don't have the data in front of me regarding specifically CFSA involved youth. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
What is DBH's perception of the extent to which this is a problem?
Yeah. I think as we heard today, there are some concerns, right, with access. There's some concerns with retention of, we hear often that, you know, I've built a relationship with the clinician and then unfortunately they leave and I have to tell my story again. And so I think there are some, you know, challenges around workforce retention in those areas. I will say though that especially within our evidence-based programs, and you know this as well within the school behavioral health program, there is capacity, right? There are some workforce challenges, but we do have capacity in our evidence-based models. We don't have a wait list in CBI. And so our school behavioral health clinicians, some have a full caseload, but again, there's others that aren't at capacity.
Gotcha.
So I think it's multifaceted, right? I think there's areas where we can obviously improve, but then I also think that we do have capacity and room for individuals to engage in behavioral health services.
Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate that. Ms. Gilbert, in pre-hearing responses, CFSA said that youth or guardians with a complaint about an in-house or external provider can raise those concerns with the offices of Ombudsman for Children, which is under my committee as well. Can you describe the level and types of outreach CFSA does to inform youth and families about what the Office of Ombudsman for Children is and does?
I know that level of communication has occurred at the director's level, at the from the director's office. So we have a director of communications that has talked about that. And we also have what we call information forums that we have on a monthly basis. And that was information that was shared there as well. And then of course, for staff to make sure that they understand and know, we also have our management team meetings where information has been presented. They've also come to share information directly. So the Ombudsman office came to present and talk to us and whatnot. So yeah, we're working
our goal
really
is to make
hard.
sure everyone, as this office is new and rolled out, that everyone knows about it. So it sounds like you all, everyone has an opportunity to touch and hear about the Ombudsman Office for Children multiple times within.
Absolutely. And they actually come on site at CFSA at times too. So we've been in contact.
During the committee's fiscal year 23 performance oversight hearing, we heard from youth who described the poor quality of mental health services they received from MBI. During our fiscal year 23 budget oversight hearing, I think I spoke with Director Matthews about how CFSA monitors the performance of its providers, including MBI. Has the agency received any more complaints, formal or informal, about MBI's performance? And did you all take any additional actions to assess MBI's performance since? And were there any changes made to MBI's contracts to ensure better performance?
Right. Well, we actually, the contract ended. It was a natural ending to the contract. We did not renew it, so we don't have that in place. We've been servicing our youth, as indicated in a little bit in my testimony and some of the things I've said today. We've actually been providing the on-site services to all the youth directly. So we have not transferred any of our youth that we're providing therapy to an external provider just yet.
Okay. Great. Does Ms. Sullivan, does DBH support the development of a strategic plan for children's behavioral health, given the last such plan hasn't been updated for over a decade? And will DBH commit to undertaking this effort?
So I can say that I agree. I obviously want to hold to the director to committing to that, but of course, I also think, it's important to make sure that our goals and objectives are aligned, and obviously having a up-to-date children's plan is important. So,
Okay, great. And I should ask Christina first too, as well. Also, do you undertake that duty? But thank you for that. Ms. Gilbert, in pre-hearing responses, CFSA stated that in fiscal year 23, 93% of youth received a mental health evaluation within 30 days of entry. I'm glad to see that number is higher than previous years. So congratulations to your team for getting to that number. What are some of the reasons youth are unable to receive an evaluation within those 30 days?
So we had a couple situations in this particular instance, we had 2 youth that did not receive the evaluation within the 30 days because we had we had 2 of our therapists transition, which I included in the information. And it was during this time that we had a transition of therapists. And so we had one youth receive the evaluation within 54 days and the other within 42 days. So that was a slight delay because we had a transition of staff.
Okay, right. I just wonder if it was any factors on the youth or family part, but
no,
not the case.
No, yeah, that was a transition of staff during that time.
Can you talk about services available specifically to birth parents and other caregivers? What are the limitations on CFSA to directly provide behavioral health services to birth parents and other caregivers?
So our primary focus of the mental health team is to serve youth in care with some of the support to, of course, the resource parents. And sometimes it may include support to individual birth parents. Family therapy is not our direct focus. Of course, we don't provide it directly. And so our services are limited because of the number of staff we have and then the number of youth in care that we have to serve. So for the majority of those, we do refer out for therapy services. So we team with DBH a lot with that and other community-based organizations.
Got it. Yeah. And another category of group that I worry about, what services are available to specifically to older youth who are preparing to transition out of CFSA care? How does CFSA ensure youth does not experience sort of a lapse in care after they transition out?
Oh, post-transition, after they transition out. And that's one of the things that we do actually in preparation for transition for older youth, as we're working to transition them to adult services. And one piece of that is the Department of Behavioral Health and the services they provide, because they provide services to the community. And so we make sure that there's a connection to DBH and the services that they provide, which will help sustain them, hopefully post-care.
DBH, what does that look like? Listen, adulthood hits hard,
yes,
okay? For every normal person, right? Adulthood hits hard for all of us. But I think for our youth aging out of care, I imagine it can hit a little bit harder given all the post-traumatic stress, et cetera. What does that look like?
We know transitions are hard, but they're also triggers, right? And so we have, or can be triggers, I should say. We have programs around transition age youth, so our young adults. And so we actually have a SAMHSA grant specific on that population, not just specific to CFSA youth, but youth across the band. We provide an evidence-based model called TIP, which is Transition to Independence. Again, really looking at trying to create and provide that support for those, again, exactly what it says, transition. So what are the skills they need? Helping them find a job, talking to them about housing. What does that look like in the city, right? Like we need to be realistic, and how do we help them kind of bridge that, right? So in addition to the support, obviously around behavioral health, so whether it's mental health, diagnosis or substance use diagnosis or both, we're also helping to tap into those skills that they're going to need to help them be successful.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's a group that we are focusing on our side in our committee. And so just helpful to hear what that looks like and how we can make that more robust. Ms. Gilbert, in pre-hearing responses, CFSA said the primary reasons youth in care are unable to choose or choose not to receive a behavioral health services include client refusal, the agency's inability to engage youth, parental consent, and lack of specialized resources in the community. Which of those reasons is the most common? And what does CFSA do if a youth refuses or parent does not consent to services?
So the most common would be the client refusing services.
Okay.
That's that would be the primary reason. And there are times where we would circle back around. Sometimes you just need time to sort of, we need time with the youth to sort of build a relationship, help connect, work with the social work teams around that.
Yeah.
So just because they refuse services, we don't just naturally stop and don't follow back up. Sometimes we're able to circle back around, and sometimes it just takes a minute to engage them in a different way. We have a couple of youth where it took a couple months to engage, but we kept checking back in. We were following up. We went to the school, we went into the community,
Okay.
and eventually we were able to get this youth into therapy, but they just needed a different way
Okay.
of engaging. But yeah, some of the older youth tend to decline services at the beginning.
I think when we talked to some youth directly, I talked about MBI earlier, but sometimes it's like if they didn't like the service provider or that gave them
Action is a big deal.
a traumatic experience, and then they want to go back. I mean, that happens for normal people. Like in order to find your therapist, you got to have like 5 therapists, and you're like, finally, there's the one that works for me. Just tell the truth here. It's real. And so I think that happens too with young people where it's like, all right, this is a fit for me. And so trying to get them to come back, even though it wasn't not the best fit the first time. And so I just want to make sure the agencies, if they refuse services, if the reason is that provider wasn't a good fit for me, that we at least try to say, well, let's find a different provider for you because you still need these services and we'll help find the right fit for you.
Right.
So I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Ms. Gilbert, how will the services or delivery change for children in foster care in the ongoing managed care transition, in Medicaid? And how is the transition being managed or planned for?
So with the new ongoing management transition to Medicaid, it's not going to impact our youth in care. We were able to follow up and verify that we're able to continue to operate services just as we are. So those youth in care will be exempt from that process, which we're really excited about because we were worried about what that could potentially look like.
That's right.
Okay,
that's great to hear.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to be fine. We're going to be stable, and we'll continue to be able to provide the services that we're providing now.
Wonderful. In your testimony, you noted a need for early intervention supports that focus on health and wellness to exist naturally in school settings and community organizations. Can you talk more about that? What would an ideal early intervention system look like? What can the council and other agencies do to sort of help develop that more robust system?
Absolutely. So one of the things that, we envision when we're talking about early intervention supports in school, and we talk about occurring naturally in the school process, it can be something as simple as, some of the mindfulness activities, some of the yoga activities, things that are happening, when they go to their first class in the morning or just a few minutes before if they do. And that something within the school system, whether it's the first class in the morning and maybe the last class because they had a rough day in between, right? And so there's sort of this opening support piece, whether it's through play, whether it's through mindfulness things, we've seen young people really engage in therapy before. We've seen a lot of different ways for them to do that, music, art, all the things that you're proposing here. And so one of the things that we talked about is that if that can be a natural part of the curriculum and process in schools, not so much that it has to be a standalone program, but maybe even as teachers or, whomever come in and just, take a few minutes a day to be able to sort of concentrate on some of those things and do that check in or are you okay? And what does that mean for you? And then at the end of the day, because you may have had a rough day, of course,
that's right.
And at the end of the day, maybe there's another small activity or event. So that's something to get it started. And then I think it can build from there. Nothing complex, but right now we don't believe that level of check-in is happening. And so just to start with something small is what we're envisioning now. Something really simple that can be done in the classroom, not take too much time away from the curriculum, and it can make a big difference.
when I was in Upward Bound, we used to have group therapy. We all hated it, but in the perspective, we had it once a week on Wednesdays. We're like, oh, it's group therapy today. But actually we needed it and it made a huge difference. And later on in life, you realize,
Absolutely.
wow, that was a session we all needed. And every time we were in it, before we went in it, we all would be like, oh, but we would leave feeling lighter. So I agree with you there.
And younger children tend to be excited about little, group activities and coming together and doing things. So.
Ms. Sullivan, what are your thoughts on what an ideal early intervention system in schools in the community would look like?
I piggybacking on what was being said, I mean, I think one of the strengths of school behavioral health within the district is obviously it's is based in the public health model, right? And so incorporating exactly what Ms. Gilbert just said, that is one of the components of the program. And so I think something, doing prevention work, but then also not just that one person doing it, but it being comprehensive and really bought in by the school, right?
Yeah.
So you have the clinician or the teacher or whomever is doing the early intervention, right? So doing that mindfulness activity. But then that same concept and those same ideas are spread throughout the entire building and the culture is shifted, right? So it's not just that one moment, but everybody's speaking, thinking the same way, right? And that's when you look at the whole person and not just the youth who need the treatment services or not just the kids who are in special ed, but again, the entire culture, everybody's speaking the same language, doing the same thing. So, and honestly, just not in schools either, right? Like we're doing that in workplaces. We're doing that in, at home and communities. We're teaching parents how to use the same skills that we're teaching the youth to do in the classroom, right? So that they can then generalize and use those skills at home.
Yeah. Last questions, Ms. Gilbert, what service for some specific groups, what services are available specifically for LGBTQIA plus youth in care?
So we don't have a specific, I would say a specific practice or service directly related to LGBTQ. What I would say is that we sort of service them on a case-by-case basis. And what I mean by that is that it's a part of the natural treatment process between the therapist and the youth. And so that right now that's the level of sort of intervention that we're doing, but we don't have a specific service or a specific therapist that service that population just yet. But we actually have quite a number of youth in which we're supporting that are in therapy that, are being supported around that particular issue. So.
And then what about services specifically to criminal justice involved youth in care? Is there any special set of services for them? Or is it?
I can actually let Megan.
So for our youth who have DYRS, we have some specific courts and provide support. And so it can be based on whether they're part of that court and they get behavioral health services. But similar to CFSA, we're making sure that their treatment plan is addressing their specific needs and goals. So I would say our most specific services are through those courts and that diversion
courts.
But I forget her name. I think it was Miss Bowman was talking about sexual exploited children. And so our Hope Court really works with, as you smile, works with those
Hope
youth.
Court. I was at the OAG when Hope Court was created.
Yeah.
I came from our Philadelphia rap court. So this is one of my.
So I think, so again, some very specific interventions and treatments for those youth, which are important.
And then the last group I know has been we have an opioid crisis in our city, obviously. Councilmember Henderson has been leading in such great way for the city in that way. What services are available specifically for youth struggling with substance abuse disorders? Also, given that participation must be voluntary, what strategies did CFSA implement to increase youth participation to that particular group?
Yeah, I was speaking before that we have a substance use coordinator that helps to support any referrals that we receive for youth that need substance use services. We also have 2 or 3 community-based organizations that we refer to directly that we have a really close relationship with to help support the youth, and we maintain contact and whatnot. And then there was one thing that I failed to say, Councilmember Henderson, early on, is that we did actually locate a residential substance use program where we had one youth to be able to participate in a 21-day program, and they did complete that program.
Wonderful.
And so hopefully at some point we can expand on that service. And that was one of the, she asked about sort of in service programs. And so that we did have one youth to participate in a 21-day program locally.
Got it. Councilmember Henderson, do you have any additional questions? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to all our government and public witnesses. Do you all have any final words that you want to put on the record at this time?
No, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Well, this concludes today's hearing on B25-500, the Alternative Restorative Therapy Options for Youth Amendment Act of 2023 and Mental and Behavioral Health of Children in the District Child Welfare System. For the public, if you would like to submit written testimony for the record, please do so by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, December 13th by uploading your testimony to the council's hearing management system or emailing facilities@dccouncil.gov. The time is 12:32 p.m. and this hearing is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.